Before TBI even confirmed what they were searching for on 3500 Van Hill Road, Donna Seraphina suddenly announced she had rediscovered old psychic recordings files that appeared only hours after the raid. At the same time, every local Ryan interviewed warned him that key figures promoted online, especially Fred Hill, have a long history of fabricated stories and unreliable recall. Yet on YouTube, these same individuals became central voices shaping the case's direction. When psychic revelations emerge on the same day as a law enforcement operation, and locals reject the very sources creators rely on, what version of the truth are we actually following? The rise of Donna Seraphina's readings within the Summerwells case can only be understood through the structure of modern attention dynamics. When law enforcement remains silent for prolonged periods, and official leads diminish to zero, the informational landscape does not remain empty. Instead, a vacuum emerges, one that does not stay unoccupied. In that vacuum, the most attention-capturing narrative takes priority, regardless of evidentiary value. Donna's readings, with their emotionally charged descriptions and high ambiguity symbolism, became the dominant content form precisely because the case lacked new forensic data. They filled a systemic gap, not an investigational need. This dynamic follows a predictable pattern in digital ecosystems. When viewers cannot obtain new facts, they seek new interpretations. When no official updates are available, unofficial voices become proxies for progress. And when a case stagnates publicly for over 3 years, any alternative framework, even a psychic one, can appear to offer movement. Donna's readings benefited from this dynamic. They offered forward momentum in a case defined by stillness. Whether or not the information was verifiable became secondary to the audience's desire for narrative continuity. This is the foundation of attention economy centrality. Donna's readings did not simply exist. They functioned as high-value attention units. Each reading contained enough ambiguity to encourage speculation, but enough vivid detail to trigger emotional response. This combination is algorithmically optimal. Platforms reward content that sustains viewer curiosity, prolongs viewing time, and provokes high levels of engagement. Psychic material, by nature, accomplishes all three. A single ambiguous phrase can generate thousands of comments, dozens of derivative live streams, and continuous debate among creators. The readings become a renewable resource, reusable, reinterpretable, and repackaged across multiple channels. This is precisely why psychic narratives thrive in an information-silent environment. Information vacuum exploitation occurs when creators or audiences fill the absence of real investigative data with interpretations, speculations, or spiritual insights. It is not necessarily malicious, it is structural. Human cognition is uncomfortable with unanswered questions and incomplete patterns. A missing child case with no confirmed suspects, no public forensic breakthroughs, and no law enforcement clarifications creates psychological pressure. That pressure incentivizes alternative explanations. Donna's readings stepped into that role because they provided closure-shaped content. They sounded like answers in a context where answers were scarce. The exploitation emerges when that content, originally speculative, becomes perceived as authoritative. Each new reading creates the impression of discovery, even if no tangible evidence exists. The psychic narrative substitutes for the investigative narrative, filling the void left by TBI's silence. Over time, the community begins interpreting readings the same way it would interpret factual leads. The psychic narrative becomes the de facto investigative thread, even though it lacks forensic grounding. This is where the connection between drama spikes, new readings, and viewer retention becomes structurally relevant. Psychic content does not rise in a vacuum. It rises specifically when dramatic tension is high. The Summerwells community repeatedly demonstrated that psychic updates tend to appear immediately after spikes in conflict, creator disagreements, leaked emails, accusations involving locals, or disputes over credibility. These spikes increase viewer activity. Increased activity signals algorithmic relevance. Algorithmic relevance encourages creators to produce more content that aligns with the spike. Donna's readings repeatedly appeared at these exact inflection points. The most significant example and the clearest forensic red flag is the timing of the readings released after the TBI search on 3500 Van Hill Road. For months prior to the raid, no new recordings were publicly disclosed. Then, immediately after the TBI operation became public, Donna announced that she had found old psychic files she had supposedly forgotten. The content of those files allegedly aligned with elements of the terrain in the Van Hill area. This is not evidence of psychic accuracy, it is evidence of attention-based release timing. The alignment between a major public investigative event and the sudden emergence of forgotten readings generates several investigative concerns. First, any information introduced after a public event cannot be verified as independent. There is no way to confirm that the content existed in its final form before Donna learned of the raid. Without metadata, timestamps, or third-party verification, the timing alone undermines its forensic value. Second, the probability of contamination, whether conscious or unconscious, becomes high. Once information about the Van Hill location entered the public sphere, any subsequent reading risks being influenced by that knowledge. This pattern indicates a strong correlation between algorithmic stimuli and psychic content release, not between psychic content and investigative discovery. In forensics, sequence matters. Information that precedes an event can be tested. Information that follows an event cannot be disentangled from external influence. The readings released after the TBI raid fall squarely into the second category. From a forensic standpoint, independent origin is non-negotiable. For information to have investigative utility, it must satisfy 5 criteria. It must originate independently of public data. It must have a verifiable timestamp predating external triggers. It must not be influenced by community speculation or media coverage. It must provide specific, non-generic details. Its narrative must remain consistent over time. Donna's readings do not meet these thresholds. Their origin cannot be verified. Their timestamps are self-reported rather than forensically validated. Their content aligns with generic Appalachian geography, ravines, water, railroads, old buildings, which appears in numerous areas across multiple counties. Their narrative shifts based on which creators Donna collaborates with and what conflicts dominate the community at a given moment, and their release pattern correlates more strongly with drama cycles than with investigative cycles. This analysis identifies clear contamination pathways. Public knowledge of the TBI raid spreads through creators' live streams. Those live streams inform viewers. Donna, as a viewer of community dynamics, is then exposed to that information before producing or releasing her own content. Similarly, locals' rumors, statements from individuals like Fred Hill, or interpretations provided during panel discussions can influence the psychic narrative even without deliberate intention. The content becomes a composite of community discourse rather than an independent data source. In forensic terms, contaminated information cannot be used to locate a missing person. The risk of circular reinforcement is too high. If the reading reflects the community's existing speculation, and the community's speculation later references the reading, the system becomes self-referential. No fact emerges from such loops, only the illusion of fact. The algorithm intensifies this loop. YouTube's system prioritizes controversy, watch time, and interconnected content chains. A psychic reading that triggers multiple response videos will be algorithmically promoted across the platform. This increases its reach and perceived legitimacy, independent of its evidentiary value. Viewers interpret reach as credibility. Creators interpret viewer interest as validation, and the psychic narrative expands further, displacing real investigative focus. The investigative consequence is clear: the psychic narrative becomes louder than the factual one. Evidence-based lines of inquiry are overshadowed by emotion-driven interpretations. Search efforts scatter into irrelevant areas. Locals grow distrustful of outsiders because the psychic content distorts their community's image. And law enforcement remains no closer to resolving the case, even as online conversation accelerates. This dynamic ends in a critical forensic dilemma. When information is released primarily because the algorithm rewards the release, not because evidence demands it, the information becomes structurally unreliable. Psychic readings that emerge in response to attention spikes may satisfy an audience, but they do not satisfy investigative standards. The concluding question, therefore, is not rhetorical, it is structural. If a clue appears only when the algorithm demands new content rather than when the evidence reliably develops, can it still be considered part of a real investigation, or is it simply content crafted to fill the informational void? One of the most significant distortions in the Summer-Wells case emerges from the fundamental divide between people who live in the terrain and people who narrate it from online platforms. This divide is not minor. It defines the entire structure of conflict surrounding every claim, clue, and interpretation that circulates in the Summer-Wells ecosystem. The tension between local truth and creator truth is not a disagreement over details, it is a structural gap between two completely different knowledge systems. The former is grounded in lived experience, the latter is grounded in digital interpretation, algorithmic amplification, and attention-based incentives. The clearest illustration of this divide appears in the interactions Ryan has documented with Ben Hill residents. According to his account, locals warned him directly, sometimes aggressively, to stay away from their properties and to stop associating with YouTubers who turn their community into a stage for conflict. Their refusal to cooperate is not rooted in apathy toward the case. It is rooted in exhaustion from being repeatedly misrepresented, filmed, speculated about, or incorporated into narratives that do not reflect reality. Ben Hill is a rural, insular area where people have known each other and each other's families for decades. When a creator misidentifies a ravine, a path, a house, or a rumor, locals know immediately that the interpretation is wrong. But correcting it online is nearly impossible, because creator platforms amplify drama, not accuracy. This is the core of the asymmetry. Locals possess geographic and historical access knowledge of land use, property lines, abandoned structures, family histories, and community rumors, while creators possess attention access, meaning they control the narratives that tens of thousands of viewers consume. The result is a major imbalance in which those most familiar with the terrain have the least influence over how it is portrayed, while those least familiar with it have the most power to shape public perception. The case of Fred Hill demonstrates this asymmetry vividly. Every local voice Ryan encountered asserted the same assessment. Fred has a long reputation for lying, exaggeration, inventing stories, and manipulating outsiders. Locals stated he had a history of substance-related struggles, erratic behavior, and fabrications, including inventing individuals like Crazy Bill. They dismissed most of what he said as unreliable or deliberately misleading. Yet on YouTube, Fred was elevated into the role of key witness, insider, or even the one who knows the truth. Creators placed him at the center of discussions, interviews, and explanation streams. The more locals rejected his credibility, the more appealing he became to creators who wanted an exclusive narrative advantage. This inversion of credibility does not happen in investigative work, it happens in attention economies. A person dismissed locally is valuable online precisely because his information is contested. The conflict generates views, comments, debates, reaction videos, and multi-stream discussions. A key witness, who is disputed by the people who actually know him, becomes an algorithmic asset. His contradictions become content. His claims, regardless of accuracy, become narrative fuel. This explains why some creators continued relying on Fred despite overwhelming local objections. His instability was not a flaw in the content economy, it was a feature. Meanwhile, locals observed that platforms continued circulating false interpretations of their land, their families, and their history. This contributed to mistrust. When Donna's readings described mills, tunnels, ravines, sacrificial sites, hollow logs, paths, or old train structures, locals did not confirm the accuracy. In many cases, they contradicted them directly. The tunnels under the Rotherwood Mansion narrative, for example, was refuted by the current owners, who explained that any prior tunnels were sealed decades ago and did not match the descriptions creators circulated. The same occurred with the alleged water wheel, or mill gear, structures near various hollows. Locals clarified what existed and what did not, but these corrections rarely penetrated the online narrative. This is the second major asymmetry: physical verification versus digital imagination. Locals physically occupy the terrain. They know which mills were operational, which structures are abandoned, which creeks flood, which hollows lead nowhere, and which paths are used by hunters, hikers, or off-road vehicles. They have observed the land under all seasons, weather patterns, and generational changes. Creators, in contrast, interpret terrain through satellite images, viewer tips, or symbolic descriptions from psychic readings. When psychic narratives introduce elements like a water wheel, or ravine, a lodge, or a hollow log, creators search for visual parallels to match the imagery. The problem is that Appalachian geography contains hundreds of such parallels. A ravine is not unique. A stream is not unique. A shack is not unique. This allows creators to match readings to multiple different areas, producing an illusion of specificity where none actually exists. Locals recognize this phenomenon immediately. They understand that the readings do not correspond precisely to any one location. But when they attempt to explain this, the explanation encounters friction in online spaces because digital audiences are invested in the narrative framework creators have built. Where locals see inconsistencies, creators see possibilities. Where locals identify inaccuracies, creators identify content opportunities. Where locals reject psychic descriptions, creators reinterpret them metaphorically, symbolically, or as partial matches. The narrative does not collapse under contradiction, it expands. The refusal of locals to cooperate with creators is thus not a refusal to help find summer wells. It is a refusal to participate in narratives that distort their community and turn them into characters in a digital storyline. Many locals told Ryan they feared YouTubers would misrepresent them or expose their families to harassment. Others expressed anger at being filmed or questioned by outsiders, who arrived with preconceived theories built from live-stream gossip rather than first-hand knowledge. This is why creators often turn to individuals like Fred instead of verifying information with broader local populations. Fred is willing to participate, and his participation produces content. The consequences extend beyond interpersonal tension. The disconnect between local truth and creator truth directly affects how the public interprets leads. For example, none of the locals Ryan encountered confirmed the existence of the specific features Donna described, such as tunnels, water wheels, ritual sites, or geographically unique markers in the Van Hill region. Without local verification, these elements remain unanswered claims. But online audiences often accept them as factual because they align with a compelling narrative. This selective acceptance, embracing psychic descriptions while discarding local corrections, creates a distorted investigative landscape where digital perception becomes stronger than physical reality. The information asymmetry also contaminates discussions about search locations. When psychic readings suggest a location, and creators identify a matching terrain feature on satellite maps, viewers interpret this as confirmation. But locals often know that the area in question is inaccessible, unremarkable, or completely unrelated to the case. The gap between what is speculated online and what is physically possible on the ground grows wider with each iteration. This leads to search fragmentation, where attention disperses across dozens of irrelevant areas rather than converging on verified investigative leads. The forensic risk is clear when online narratives do not align with physical reality. The investigation becomes detached from the environment in which the crime occurred. Instead of analyzing actual access points, real roads, historical traffic patterns, or verifiable behaviors of people living near Ben Hill, creators analyze symbols and impressions. The case becomes narrative-driven rather than evidence-driven. Locals see this divergence and reject participation, which further isolates creators from the actual geography. The cycle repeats, with creators relying more heavily on non-local sources, psychics, online rumors, or individuals with questionable credibility. At the core of this dynamic lies a simple structural problem: local truth is grounded, slow, and limited in its reach, while creator truth is amplified, flexible, and algorithmically rewarded. Local truth does not trend, creator truth does. Local truth resists dramatization, creator truth depends on it. The more dramatic the online narrative becomes, the less it reflects the community it claims to describe. The fundamental investigative question that emerges from this divide is the following: if online information cannot be corroborated by the people who live in the terrain and know its structures intimately, Which narrative deserves investigative weight? The one that is physically verifiable, or the one that merely circulates more efficiently through the algorithm? One of the most structurally significant contradictions in the summer Wells' case revolves around the figure of Fred Hill. His role exposes the fragility of the information pipeline used by several creators and highlights how a source rejected by those with first-hand knowledge of the terrain can nevertheless become central to online investigative narratives. The discrepancy between local assessments of Fred and his elevation by creators such as Donna Seraphina, Ziggy, and Sweetie Pilo represents a clear example of credibility inversion, a process where a low-credibility individual becomes a high-value narrative asset solely within the attention economy. Locals who have lived around Ben Hill for decades describe Fred with remarkable consistency. Ryan's accounts and multiple community testimonies characterize him as a liar, a storyteller, and a person whose long history of substance-related issues has led to a damaged memory and unreliable recall. They describe him as someone who creates exaggerated tales, invents people who do not exist, and frequently shifts his statements depending on his audience. These descriptions are not casual insults. They are informed by years of lived experience and repeated interactions. For the community, Fred's pattern of misinformation is well established and widely recognized. The clearest example of Fred's fabrication is the Deer Bones incident. In this event, Fred guided Ziggy to what he insisted were the remains of Summer Wells. His claim generated panic, shock, and immediate online speculation. Yet when the bones were examined, they were conclusively identified as deer bones, a false alarm entirely created by Fred. The incident did not merely showcase a mistake, it demonstrated a profound lack of reliability and an alarming willingness to label ordinary environmental debris as evidence of a missing child. This should have disqualified Fred as an investigative source. Instead, the incident became one of the earliest signals of a deeper problem. The online infrastructure surrounding the case was ready to amplify even the least credible claims if they carried dramatic potential. Despite this track record, Fred underwent a transformation within creator-driven spaces. Donna, Ziggy, and Sweetie Pilo progressively elevated him into a key witness, positioning him as an essential interpreter of psychic readings and hinting that he held insider knowledge that locals either ignored or suppressed. This shift did not occur because Fred provided verified information, it occurred because his involvement produced content. In live streams, Fred's claims were treated as meaningful connections rather than potential distortions. When Donna described symbolic figures, landscapes, or impressions from her readings, Fred was invited to confirm or recognize those details. This dynamic reconfigured him from an unreliable narrator into a central node of the psychic investigative narrative. The process by which Fred became a primary information source highlights a core investigative hazard. When creators rely on a single, unverified individual to validate subjective interpretations, the entire narrative becomes structurally compromised. Psychic readings are already non-forensic in nature. They lack verifiable timestamps, independent origin, and objective content. When those readings are then cross-referenced with an individual whose credibility is repeatedly contested by locals, the result is a contaminated information chain. Instead of triangulating information through independent sources, creators kept reinforcing readings through Fred's interpretations. The readings influenced Fred, and Fred influenced the readings. This closed loop created the illusion of evidence without producing any. The contamination risk becomes especially clear when analyzing how the livestream dynamic functioned. Donna would describe an image or scenario from her readings, such as a structure, a sound, or a specific emotional impression. Ziggy or Sweetie would then ask Fred whether the imagery matched anything he knew. Instead of evaluating the accuracy of the imagery against independent sources, Fred often responded affirmatively, recognizing people or places based on vague descriptions. This recognition was then treated as validation of the reading, even though the logic flowed in the opposite direction. Fred was not confirming the reading, he was interpreting it through his own unstable narrative framework. From a forensic standpoint, this feedback loop removes any possibility of independent verification. A psychic impression is not evidence. A known unreliable narrator agreeing with that impression does not transform it into evidence. It merely produces a synchronized story supported by two non-forensic sources. Investigations require data that advances independently through multiple channels. They do not treat mutual reinforcement among compromised sources as corroboration. In the Summerwells case, the opposite occurred. The more Fred aligned with Donna's content, the more he was framed as trustworthy, and the more the online narrative diverged from the reality described by locals. The key structural issue is the asymmetry of incentives. Locals gain nothing from exaggerating or fabricating details. Their credibility in their own community matters, and misstatements would affect their relationships, reputations, and safety. Fred, on the other hand, operated from a different incentive environment. His participation provided him with attention, validation, and influence he did not previously possess. Online creators, who needed dramatic or exclusive information to sustain viewership, had every incentive to keep him at the center of conversations. This dynamic rewarded Fred not for accuracy, but for engagement value. This is why dependence on Fred damages the investigative value of Donna's readings. A psychic reading is already a subjective, unverifiable impression. When the interpretation of that impression is outsourced to a person locally known for inventing stories, the probability of distortion increases exponentially. Each time Fred recognized a detail, he shaped the narrative direction. Each time a creator encouraged him to elaborate, he supplied new speculative elements. These elements fed back into the psychic framework, effectively rewriting or expanding the readings. This creates a hybrid narrative, part psychic, part Fred's invention. No forensic method can untangle which components originate from Donna's subjective impressions, which arise from Fred's imagination, and which result from creators guiding the interpretation. Another contamination pathway arises from the sequence of exposure. Fred watched live streams, heard readings, and absorbed interpretations before providing his own statements. This makes it impossible to determine whether his claims are original or reflections of content he already consumed. This is basic contamination theory. If a witness is exposed to suggestive material before providing a statement, their testimony is considered tainted. No credible investigator would accept statements from a witness who had already been influenced by psychic narratives, creator commentary, or viewer speculation. Yet in the online environment surrounding this case, the contamination was not only tolerated, it was incorporated into the core narrative structure. The Deer Bones incident illustrates this point clearly. If an individual misidentifies animal remains as a missing child's remains, their threshold for accuracy is fundamentally compromised. Such a mistake places the burden on creators to treat all subsequent claims with extreme caution. Instead, this incident was repurposed as part of a justification narrative. Some creators framed Fred's error as an emotional response, a misunderstood attempt to help, or evidence that he had been under pressure. Rather than lowering his credibility, the incident was reinterpreted to preserve his role within the narrative. This is further evidence that the narrative depended on Fred, not because he was reliable, but because his presence generated engagement. The entire structure raises a simple but decisive investigative question. When the primary source of corroboration for psychic content is a person the local community describes as a pathological liar, the narrative cannot be treated as an evidence-based lead. It is an attention-based construction, assembled from subjective impressions and unverifiable interpretations. No matter how emotionally compelling or algorithmically successful, it provides no forensic advancement. The conclusion is therefore unavoidable. If the central data source is repeatedly questioned by those who know him best, and if his statements arise from a contaminated feedback loop rather than independent knowledge, what value can the entire chain of reasoning possibly hold for any serious investigation? The most revealing moment in the entire psychic-driven narrative occurred in the hours immediately following the TBI search on 3500 Van Hill Road. After months of relative quiet from Donna Seraphina, she abruptly announced that she had found previously forgotten recordings, older readings, supposedly created years ago, which she had overlooked in her archives. This discovery did not happen weeks before the search, nor months earlier when the community was demanding new insight. It occurred within hours of a major law enforcement operation becoming public. This time conflict is not a peripheral detail, it is the core forensic issue. When information appears after an external event, its independence is automatically suspect. For forensic evaluation, the critical question is not whether the content is emotionally compelling or intuitively interesting. The question is whether the information existed in its final form before the trigger event and whether it was insulated from public influence. Without verifiable timestamps, file creation metadata, or third-party validation confirming the readings predate the TBI raid, their evidentiary value is effectively zero. The readings may still hold narrative value for viewers, but narrative value is not investigative value. 3 primary hypotheses can explain the timing of Donna's announcement. 1. Hypothesis A: the readings were genuinely old but never reviewed. This hypothesis assumes the recordings were created years earlier but were ignored, misplaced, or archived. If true, it would mean that Donna's discovery was merely a delayed retrieval. Even under this assumption, the readings cannot be considered independent investigative data unless the original creation timestamps can be verified through forensic file analysis. For an audio file to be treated as evidence adjacent, investigators require metadata demonstrating that the file was created prior to the TBI raid, stored without alteration, and insulated from external contamination. The challenge is that psychic content does not operate within evidentiary protocols. There is no chain of custody. There is no version control. There is no verification mechanism demonstrating that the files were not modified, re-recorded, or influenced by subsequent events. Without these safeguards, Hypothesis A remains a theoretical possibility, but not a forensic basis for action. Even if Donna sincerely believes the files are old, sincerity is not a substitute for metadata. 2. Hypothesis B: the readings were influenced, consciously or unconsciously, by news contamination. This hypothesis aligns with established patterns of cognitive contamination. Once Donna was exposed to information about the Van Hill search, whether through live-stream commentary, messages, or community excitement, any psychic content generated or recalled afterward risks being shaped by that exposure. Psychics, like all individuals, are susceptible to informational priming. When a highly specific external event occurs, people unconsciously integrate that event into their interpretations, memories, and intuitive impressions. Under this hypothesis, the rediscovered readings might not be deliberate fabrications. They might simply reflect unconscious pattern matching triggered by the raid. The human brain seeks coherence. When it encounters emotional turmoil, community speculation, or new data points, it reorganizes impressions accordingly. If Donna reviewed older files after hearing about the raid, she might interpret ambiguous imagery as suddenly aligning with the Van Hill terrain, even if her earlier interpretations were different. This is why investigators reject data that appears after a widely publicized event. The risk of contamination is not an accusation of dishonesty, it is a recognition of human cognitive limitations. Under forensic standards, even the possibility of contamination disqualifies the reading from being treated as an independent lead. 3. Hypothesis C: the readings were released strategically to maintain narrative control. This hypothesis focuses on timing within the attention economy, rather than within psychic cognition. The sudden law enforcement raid created a spike in viewer interest, a surge in livestream engagement, and an urgent demand for new interpretations. Creators who had built their channels around the Summer Wells case risked losing narrative authority if they did not respond quickly. In this environment, new psychic content, especially content claimed to be old and previously hidden, serves a powerful narrative function. It allows the psychic to reassert relevance, reconnect readings to breaking news, and position themselves as possessing pre-existing knowledge that law enforcement is only now catching up to. The issue is not whether this strategy was conscious. The structural incentive exists regardless of intention. The algorithm rewards creators who align their content with trending events. The community rewards those who can produce explanations during moments of uncertainty. Under these pressures, even good faith actors may accelerate content release. But in an investigative context, Accelerated release time to public events is precisely what diminishes evidentiary reliability. When analyzing the timeline objectively, the pattern is clear. Before the TBI raid, there were no new psychic releases. During periods of low attention, readings remained dormant. Immediately after the raid, old recordings surfaced with claims of geographic alignment. This alignment mirrors the structure of reactionary content, not predictive information. In forensic work, predictive value is determined by whether the information preceded the event. Reactionary information is assessed only for narrative significance, not investigative relevance. A reading that appears after the Van Hill raid cannot be considered evidence of anything except its own timing. It may be emotionally satisfying to viewers, but it does not survive forensic scrutiny. Every investigative discipline, digital forensics, criminal profiling, search and rescue analysis, requires that information submitted as a potential lead be independent of public reporting. The reason is simple. Non-independent information cannot distinguish between authentic insight and post-event reinterpretation. A reading influenced by media reports is no different from a viewer theory influenced by livestream gossip. Both are downstream interpretations, not upstream sources. For a psychic file to hold even minimal investigative value, it must demonstrate temporal independence, creation before exposure to the event, data isolation, no access to the contaminating information, specificity, details that cannot be generalized across dozens of potential locations. Consistency, the reading must not evolve to match public developments. Triangulation, corroboration from independent, non-psychic sources. Donna's rediscovered readings fail all 5 criteria: no timestamp verification, no data isolation, low geographic specificity, narrative evolution over time, and corroboration drawn not from independent sources, but from collaborators like Fred Hill, whose credibility is itself contested. At the intersection of timing, contamination risk, online incentives, and forensic standards lies a single critical question that defines the value of these readings. If the information emerges only after a law enforcement event becomes public, and if its timing aligns more closely with algorithmic opportunity than with investigative necessity, what part of it can be considered independent knowledge, rather than a reflection of external influence? This is not a question about belief, sincerity, or intention. It is a forensic question. And under forensic standards, information whose independence cannot be demonstrated cannot be used to locate a missing child. One of the most persistent problems in evaluating Donna's readings is the geographic ambiguity embedded within every key descriptor: water wheel, ravine, lodge, hollow log, railroad, creek, confluence, ivy thicket, or old mill area. These elements sound specific, but their specificity collapses under forensic scrutiny. When translated into actual physical space, these features are not unique, not rare, and not diagnostic. They are common structural components of the Appalachian landscape, repeated across dozens, sometimes hundreds of locations within a small radius. This is the foundation of the false positive geography problem. Descriptors that feel precise, but are functionally meaningless for locating a missing person. To evaluate these descriptions properly, each element must be dissected individually, then examined within the larger context of regional geography and actual field verification. A water wheel sounds like a distinctive marker, a historic structure, a central image, something that would clearly identify a location. But Appalachian foothills are dotted with remnants of mills, industrial gear mechanisms, rusted circular machinery, and discarded farm equipment that mimic the silhouette of a water wheel. In the Van Hill-Rogersville region alone, multiple properties contain circular metal structures partially buried under vegetation. Ryan's on-the-ground investigation confirmed that one of the supposed water wheels in question was not a water wheel at all. It was a decayed mill gear, mechanically circular, rusted, and visually similar enough that someone observing in abstract, symbolic form could interpret it as a wheel. The problem is that this kind of misidentification is not isolated. Across Appalachian hollows, abandoned sawmill parts, gear plates, and collapsed farm machinery routinely resemble wheel-like shapes. Thus, the presence of a wheel-shaped object does not narrow the search, it widens it to hundreds of irrelevant matches. The next descriptor, ravine, is even more problematic. Ravines are ubiquitous in this region due to natural erosion, stream carving, and incline shifts. The Appalachian terrain contains thousands of ravines, many of them visually indistinguishable from one another. Any area with a modest elevation change and seasonal water flow produces ravine structures. From a forensic mapping perspective, ravine is one of the least useful descriptors imaginable. Unless paired with highly specific structural markers such as man-made modifications, identifiable debris, or unique geology, it cannot serve as a location indicator. Psychic readings often rely on symbolic impressions rather than literal geography, which increases the risk of false positives seeing a ravine and assuming it matches a reading, when in reality dozens of other ravines match equally well. This is the essence of geographic non-specificity. The feature is real, but it is real everywhere. The term lodge or wooden lodge introduces yet another ambiguity. In rural Tennessee, abandoned cabins, hunting shelters, weekend cottages, and small wooden structures are common across private lands. Many contain similar architectural elements: weathered planks, tin roofs, porches, or loft structures. Without a distinctive design element or known historical identifier, lodge adds very little value to investigative efforts. Creators sometimes highlight structures that aesthetically feel like the lodge described in the readings, but without independent evidence linking the structure to the case. Resemblance alone cannot justify investigative weight. Similarity does not imply significance. A cabin that matches the general feel of a psychic description does not improve the probability of case relevance unless it is supported by verifiable timelines, witness accounts, or forensic anomalies. In Appalachian terrain, dozens of such cabins exist within any 10-mile radius, meaning a lodge-based clue can produce dozens of false hits. A hollow log is among the most common features in a forested region with extensive fungal decay, storm damage, and old tree fall. The forests surrounding Ben Hill, Light Hollow, and the Van Hill corridor contain countless hollow logs in various states of rot. The presence of a hollow log does not narrow down a search area. It identifies a category that applies to nearly every hollow, creek bed, or wooded path. If a clue identifies a feature that exists everywhere, the clue holds no diagnostic value. Because hollow logs are so ubiquitous, any reading referencing them creates an illusion of specificity. A log that matches the general visual description can be found within minutes in most Appalachian forests. Without coordinates, historical linkage, or a witness statement, hollow log is functionally indistinguishable from noise. Railroad lines cross large portions of East Tennessee, running through both active and abandoned corridors. Many psychic readings reference railroad tracks as symbolic travel paths, boundaries, or industrial remnants. Creators often treat this descriptor as a strong geographic anchor. Railroads feel concrete and significant. But in reality, the presence of a railroad defines nothing. Abandoned spurs, industrial access lines, and freight corridors create dozens of potential match points. Unless a psychic description identifies a unique structural element, such as a specific type of trestle, mile marker, or recognizable landmark, railroads add more confusion than clarity. Furthermore, railroad lines often run adjacent to ravines, mills, and creek beds. This clustering means multiple descriptors can overlap naturally without implying a specific location. The illusion of convergence emerges not because the readings are accurate, but because Appalachian topography produces repeating patterns. To understand why these psychic descriptors produce endless false positives, one must examine Appalachian geography systematically. The region contains thousands of ravines formed by erosion, hundreds of old mills or mill remnants, dozens of abandoned cabins across each county, continuous railroad lines intersecting multiple hollows, dense forests full of hollow logs, mossy clearings, and overgrowth, intermittent creek systems running parallel to ridge lines, structures with decayed circular machinery resembling wheels. This repetition is not incidental. It is the defining feature of the terrain. A psychic reading using symbolic or generic descriptors will inevitably match hundreds of real locations, not because it is accurate, but because the environment itself produces repeating patterns. False positive geography occurs when a descriptor is so broad that it appears to match numerous locations, creating the illusion of precision without delivering any. The psychic descriptor, ravine near a wheel in a cabin, seems meaningful only to those unfamiliar with the terrain. In reality, this describes dozens of areas in the Rogersville and Hawkins County region alone. In forensic search work, any indicator that lacks discriminative power is excluded. A clue must narrow the search, not expand it. If a descriptor can apply to 40, 70, or 200 places, it is not a lead, it is an interpretive lens. The readings create a pattern that looks convergent only because the region is dense with repeated natural forms. The illusion of accuracy arises from structural coincidence, not investigative insight. When every feature described waterwheel, ravine, lodge, hollow log, railroad can be found at countless locations across the Appalachian region, the central forensic question becomes unavoidable. Are these overlapping matches genuine indicators of a specific location, or merely illusions created by geographic repetition? The email attributed to Detective Prout circulated through Karen and tied to the Cotton Simpson case represents one of the clearest examples of how misinformation can destabilize the Summer Wells investigation. The content of the email itself is not complex. What is complex is the way it was interpreted, repurposed, and amplified by multiple creators. The email did not originate in the context of Summer Wells, did not reference the Wells family, and did not include any investigative conclusions related to Ben Hill Road. Yet despite this, it became one of the dominant narratives within the true crime community, sparking conflict, polarization, and competing claims of legitimacy. To understand why, the email must be examined not as evidence, but as a social artifact and object whose meaning was shaped more by interpretation than content. Multiple indicators showed that the email was clearly tied to the Cotton Simpson case. Prout's wording referred to a ruled out individual in the context of an unrelated criminal investigation, not to anything connected to Summer. The timeline of the correspondence, the individuals referenced, and the details cited were consistent with the Cotton case, not the Wells disappearance. The issue arose because some creators presented the email without stating its original context. When information is decontextualized, it becomes vulnerable to reinterpretation. Creators and viewers searching for answers in the Summer Wells case saw the words, ruled out, not a suspect, or not related, and immediately applied them to ongoing theories involving Fred Hill or other figures being debated within the Summer Wells community. The misapplied language created the impression that law enforcement had made a definitive statement about Summer's investigation when they had not. This is how misinformation forms, not through fabrication, but through misalignment. Even if the email had referenced Summer Wells, which it did not, it still fails basic forensic criteria. The email lacked the most essential element of any verifiable communication: metadata. Without metadata, it is impossible to confirm key attributes. The sender's identity, the email server used, the timestamp of the communication, the chain of forwarding, the absence of editing, cropping, or text alteration, whether the message was copied, paraphrased, or rewritten by an intermediary. A screenshot, text copy, or forwarded excerpt cannot be validated. Email headers, routing information, and server authentication are required for legal or investigative use. None were provided. This alone disqualifies the email from investigative relevance. The absence of metadata does not merely limit reliability, it removes it entirely. In digital forensics, unverifiable content is treated as noise, not signal. Investigators cannot rely on documents lacking authentication because they cannot distinguish between genuine communication and misrepresented fragments. Yet creators treated the email as if it were authoritative, even though it met none of the standards required for credibility. The email's influence grew not because of what it contained, but because of what viewers projected onto it. In a case filled with uncertainty, any hint of law enforcement commentary is treated as critical. Viewers want clarity. Creators want engagement. When the email surfaced, it was adopted as a definitive statement, even though the statement applied to a completely different case. Creators interpreted the email in conflicting ways. Some asserted it proved Fred Hill had been officially ruled out. Others argued it proved law enforcement was involved in a deeper conspiracy. Others accused competing creators of misrepresenting the email intentionally. Still others claimed that the email was fake or altered. What began as a misapplied communication became a centerpiece of creator disputes. The email became a symbolic object evidence not of the investigation itself, but of who controls the narrative. This is why the email escalated into a major conflict. It was never about Cotton Simpson or Summer Wells. It was about credibility, hierarchy, and authority within the creator community. The core forensic violation is straightforward. Creators attempted to infer investigative conclusions from a document that lacked context, authentication, and conceptual relevance to the case. This violation has multiple consequences. A. It distorts public understanding. Viewers assume law enforcement has taken a position they have not taken. B. It contaminates discussion. Creators build entire streams, debates, and accusations on false premises. C. It delegitimizes actual investigative work. Real leads are overshadowed by unverified digital artifacts. D. It accelerates creator conflict. The email becomes a tool for creators to defend or attack each other, shifting focus away from the missing child. E. It erodes trust in legitimate information channels. When viewers realize the email was not about Summer, they begin doubting all information, even credible updates. This is the exact mechanism through which misinformation metastasizes. One unverifiable element becomes the foundation for an entire chain of incorrect conclusions. Several structural pressures in the true crime ecosystem amplified the email's significance. Whichever creator could claim exclusive access to law enforcement communication gained a positional advantage. Controversial content receives higher engagement, increasing incentive to escalate. Creators already engaged in disputes use the email as ammunition. Viewers aligned themselves with the creators they trusted most, turning the email into factional evidence. Creators who presented the email positioned themselves as closer to law enforcement, even though the email did not relate to this case. In short, the email became valuable not because of its content, but because of its utility in creator dynamics. For investigators, an email can only be meaningful if it is authenticated, it is contextualized, it is relevant, it is independently verified, it is tied to the case in question. The email in the Karen Pruitt Cotton chain satisfied none of these requirements. It is unrelated to Summer Wells, unverifiable in origin, misapplied in interpretation, and misused in analysis. Yet it significantly shaped the community narrative, not because it clarified the case, but because it complicated the creator ecosystem. This is the paradox. An unrelated email produced more impact than many verified facts. With the context fully dismantled, one unavoidable question remains: if the email does not pertain to Summer Wells and cannot be authenticated, what meaning can any argument, accusation, or theory built upon it possibly hold? One of the most misunderstood aspects of the Summer Wells investigation involves the legal constraints under which the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation operates. The public often assumes that any compelling lead, psychic, speculative, symbolic, intuitive, or community-driven, can prompt a formal search. In reality, law enforcement agencies function under a strict evidentiary framework based on probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and verifiable actionable intelligence. Without meeting these standards, investigators cannot deploy search teams, cannot enter private property, and cannot justify resource expenditure. This is not a matter of belief or preference, it is legal compliance. Under constitutional and state law, the TBI must demonstrate probable cause before conducting a targeted search. Probable cause is defined as a set of specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable investigator to believe evidence of a crime exists in a particular location. Psychic impressions do not constitute facts. Symbolic imagery does not qualify as articulable evidence. Emotional resonance, intuition, and community speculation cannot be transformed into legally actionable grounds. Probable cause requires corroborated information tied to the timeline, behavior patterns, digital evidence, witness statements, or forensic anomalies. Without these, law enforcement cannot justify entering a structure, searching private land, or allocating specialized search units. Psychic descriptions such as a water wheel, a tunnel, a lodge, or ravine fail immediately because they lack specificity, verifiability, and connection to known case evidence. What this means is simple: TBI is not rejecting psychic descriptions because of bias, they are rejecting them because they cannot legally act on them. The online community has repeatedly referenced 3 locations: Rogersville Mill, Rotherwood Tunnels, and Sensabaugh Hollow. Each has appeared in psychic readings, creator interpretations, or community speculation. Yet in all official communication, TBI has never confirmed searching any of these areas in connection with the Summer Wells case. Psychic descriptions attached to mills, wheels, and industrial ruins created the assumption that Rogersville Mill was relevant. But mill-like structures exist across Hawkins County and surrounding regions. Without direct evidence linking the site to Summer's movements, family connections, or witness statements, TBI cannot classify it as a search priority. Creators circulated the idea that tunnels beneath the Rotherwood property were connected to the case. Local owners contradicted this directly, explaining that the tunnels had been sealed and were non-functional relics. Even if tunnels existed, psychic descriptions cannot justify a warrant, and no concrete evidence ties Summer or any relevant individual to these structures. Without personal connection, digital footprint, or witness overlap, TBI cannot legally engage. Famous for urban legends, folklore, and paranormal stories, Sensabaugh Hollow became entangled in psychic and creator narratives, despite having no factual link to the Wells timeline. The mere presence of a ravine, a stream, or a cabin does not generate investigative relevance. No official statement has ever indicated that TBI considered this area a legitimate search site. The absence of confirmation is not silence, it is an implicit rejection. If TBI does not validate an area, it means the location failed the probable cause test. For a location to be searched, the description must meet multiple forensic criteria. Psychic readings meet none. To have evidentiary value, information must precede public knowledge of events. Psychic descriptions typically emerge after news cycles, making them downstream rather than upstream sources. A wheel, log, ravine, or lodge is too generic. These descriptors are common across hundreds of acres. Forensic search requires pinpoint precision. No independent witness, digital evidence, or physical trace supports the psychic claims. Without corroboration, the information cannot move forward. Psychic impressions often reflect public chatter, creator interpretations, or subconscious incorporation of news reports. Contaminated information has no forensic value. A psychic reading cannot be disproven because it contains symbolic or metaphorical flexibility. Information that cannot be falsified cannot be used. No reading aligns concretely with confirmed statements, known movements, or digital timelines involving Summer Wells. Forensic analysis requires integration with existing data. Psychic descriptions operate independently of it. Because of these deficiencies, psychic information cannot cross the evidentiary threshold required for investigative action. TBI, like most major investigative agencies, receives psychic tips every year. The FBI has publicly stated that psychics regularly submit visions, impressions, or symbolic descriptions in nearly every missing child case. These submissions rarely, even almost never, contribute to case advancement. The reason is structural. Psychic do not include verifiable data points, cannot be time-stamped in a reliable way, cannot be proven independent of news exposure, are vulnerable to reinterpretation, produce high false positive rates, distract search resources, increase public noise, rather than investigative clarity. In the specific context of Summer Wells, TBI confirmed receiving hundreds of irrelevant tips, ranging from supernatural claims to speculative sightings. These tips did not guide the investigation, they obstructed it by diverting analytical time. The key point: law enforcement does not use psychic material because psychic material does not meet investigative standards ever. This has nothing to do with belief systems, it is purely procedural. Because TBI must act under probable cause constraints, they cannot search a mill based on a dream, enter a tunnel based on psychic imagery, investigate private property from symbolic descriptions, deploy cadaver dogs based on online speculation, commit manpower to locations lacking evidentiary connection. Every formal action must be justified, documented, and defensible. Psychic descriptors do not satisfy any requirement in the Tennessee legal framework or standard U.S. investigative protocol. when the highest investigative authority involved in the case bound by law, procedure, and evidentiary standards cannot validate a single psychic description as usable information, the central question becomes unavoidable. If TBI cannot confirm the accuracy or relevance of any psychic-derived location, what makes us believe that we, without forensic tools or legal authority, can validate it ourselves? As the Summer Wells case enters its fourth year without resolution, the information landscape surrounding it has fractured into four parallel narratives: the forensic narrative, the psychic narrative, the drama narrative, and the local narrative. These narratives do not intersect, do not inform one another, and are built on fundamentally different epistemological foundations. The result is not one investigation but four competing interpretations, each generating its own community, logic system, and internal truths. This fragmentation is not simply a matter of disagreement. It is the core reason the case has ceased to advance in any meaningful way. The forensic narrative is grounded in observable reality timelines, physical locations, access points, behavioral analysis, digital footprints, witness statements, and the structural absence of confirmed evidence. This is the narrative Ryan represents. It focuses on what can be verified, what can be disproven, and what is materially relevant to the question of Summer's disappearance. This narrative operates under investigative logic. A claim has value only if it has independent support, if it can be triangulated, and if it withstands falsification. Within this narrative, psychic impressions are irrelevant, creator speculation is noise, and unverified claims hold zero weight. Ryan's approach is constrained by the fact that TBI has released no new forensic leads, meaning the narrative progresses only through the elimination of false paths, not the discovery of confirmed ones. The forensic narrative is the slowest, least dramatic, and least emotionally satisfying, but it is the only one compatible with investigative standards. Parallel to the forensic narrative exists the psychic narrative, represented by Donna Seraphina. This narrative is not constrained by timeline accuracy, physical accessibility, witness statements, or documented movement. Instead, it operates through symbolic impressions, imagery, feelings, visions, metaphors, and associative patterns. It gains momentum through emotional resonance rather than evidentiary coherence. In the psychic narrative, the absence of evidence does not weaken a claim, it strengthens it by positioning the narrative as spiritually or intuitively revealed rather than empirically derived. Geographic features such as ravines, wheels, logs, or cabins do not require precise correspondence. Partial resemblance is treated as validation. Psychic narrative thrives in uncertainty because uncertainty creates interpretive space. This narrative forms a closed system. Psychic impressions generate interpretations. Interpretations generate locations, and locations generate further psychic content. None of these stages require external verification. As long as the emotional impact remains strong, the narrative sustains itself. The third narrative is not focused on evidence or intuitive interpretation, it is focused on interpersonal dynamics. Represented primarily by Ziggy and Sweetie Pilo, the drama narrative centers on creator conflict, credibility disputes, leaked messages, accusations, alliances, betrayals, and audience polarization. In this narrative, who said something becomes more important than what was said. Screenshots substitute for evidence. Intent, motive, and interpersonal friction overshadow the missing child. Content is structured to maximize reaction rather than clarity. This narrative thrives on instability. The lack of resolution is beneficial because it fuels ongoing discussion, live-stream debates, and a continuous cycle of conflict-driven engagement. The drama narrative feeds the algorithm with volatility, not with investigative accuracy. Even when psychic content is referenced, it is often used not for insight, but for leverage, supporting one creator, discrediting another, or escalating disputes. The drama narrative cannibalizes pieces of other narratives, but does not contribute to the case in any meaningful forensic sense. The fourth narrative belongs to the people who live on and around Ben Hill Road. Unlike the other three narratives, the local narrative is rooted in lived experience, community history, personal interactions, and geographical familiarity. Locals know the terrain not through satellite imagery or psychic symbolic mapping, but through years of walking the land, working on it, hunting on it, or raising families near it. In the local narrative, Fred Hill is widely known as unreliable. Tunnels, rituals, and dramatic scenarios do not match their knowledge of the region. Many features described in psychic readings are not unique and hold no investigative significance. Most YouTubers are seen as disruptive outsiders because the local narrative contradicts both the psychic and drama narratives. It is often dismissed online, yet it remains the only narrative besides the forensic one that is anchored to real-world knowledge. Locals, however, do not produce live streams, do not generate algorithmic waves, and do not benefit from narrative expansion. As a result, their version of events occupies the smallest share of the public discourse, despite being the most grounded. Why the four narratives do not converge? These narratives cannot merge, because they are built on incompatible rules. Forensic narrative requires verification. Psychic narrative rejects the need for verification. Drama narrative thrives on conflict, not precision. Local narrative depends on lived reality, not digital interpretation. This creates a quadrilateral of mutual isolation. Ryan cannot accept Donna's impressions because they fail evidentiary tests. Donna cannot accept Ryan's constraints because they limit interpretive freedom. Ziggy and Sweetie prioritize conflict over coherence and amplify controversies without grounding. Locals reject all of the above because none align with their first-hand experience. Each narrative explains the case according to its own internal rules, but none can incorporate the others without losing structural integrity. Which narrative is evidence-based and which is belief-based? Evidence-based narratives, forensic narrative, Ryan, local narrative, Ben Hill community, both are anchored in observable reality. They can be falsified, corrected, or verified. They involve timelines, physical spaces, and consistent patterns. Belief-based narratives, psychic narrative, Donna, drama narrative, Ziggy, Sweetie. These rely on intuition, interpretation, emotion, or interpersonal dynamics. They cannot be falsified because their validity does not depend on evidence. Their power comes from engagement, not accuracy. This separation is not a value judgment, it is an analytical classification. Investigations must operate within evidence-based systems. Belief-based systems serve social or emotional functions, but do not advance a case. Because the four narratives do not intersect, the community is not building toward a unified understanding. Instead, it is diverging further with each new development. Evidence-based investigators search actual terrain. Psychic followers search symbolic meaning. Drama followers search for interpersonal wrongdoing. Locals search for peace, accuracy, and protection from misrepresentation. None of these groups share the same goals, tools, or knowledge criteria. A search that requires convergence instead produces divergence. Every new piece of information enlarges the separation. This fragmentation ensures that collective effort does not accumulate, it disperses. Instead of narrowing the search area, the narrative ecosystem multiplies it. Instead of clarifying facts, it clouds them. Instead of reducing possibilities, it amplifies them endlessly. At this stage, the core issue is not which narrative is correct. The issue is structural. If these four parallel information worlds do not overlap, if forensic reality, psychic symbolism, creator conflict, and local knowledge remain completely separate, are we truly investigating the same case at all, or are we investigating four different versions of it?